Welcome to Biden Brief. The content of the briefing includes: Hunter Biden gives House Republicans the rebuttal they didn't want. Read the full transcript from Hunter Biden's testimony. U.S. says falling trade with China could be positive. Defiant January 6 rioter spars with judge at sentencing hearing. Breakaway Transnistria asks for Russian aid. Hunter Biden gives House Republicans the rebuttal they didn't want. Washington Post. Hunter Biden appeared before investigators and the House Oversight and Judiciary Committees to address allegations regarding his business dealings and whether President Joe Biden had benefited financially. Republican legislators sought to demonstrate that Hunter Biden's business affairs had benefited his father and that Joe Biden had used his position to that end. However, Hunter Biden firmly denied these allegations, stating that he never involved his father in his business. He repeatedly invoked this claim to counter the various lines of inquiry put forward by Republicans. Throughout the hearing, Hunter Biden emphasized the closeness of his family and the fact that his father was a career politician. He also refuted claims that his father had met people with whom he had done business, highlighting that there was no evidence of corruption on his father's part. Hunter Biden effectively responded to the various allegations and concerns raised by Republican lawmakers, offering credible explanations and counterarguments. Overall, his testimony discredited the allegations against him and his father. Read the full transcript from Hunter Biden's testimony. Washington Post. The article provides a link to the full transcript of Hunter Biden's deposition before a Republican-led congressional impeachment inquiry into his father, President Biden. In the deposition, Hunter Biden repeatedly testified that he never involved his father in any of his business decisions. U.S. says falling trade with China could be positive. BBC. Catherine Tai, the U.S.'s top trade official, has said that the steep drop in trade with China could be a positive development. The amount of goods traded between the two countries fell by 17% last year. Tai said that the decline in trade could be an indication of diversification on both sides. However, trade expert William Reinsch argued that the decline in U.S.-China trade was a sign that both economies were moving away from each other. Tai also called for reform of the World Trade Organization, saying that it needed to do more to address competitive pressures created by China's economic development. Defiant January 6 rioter spars with judge at sentencing hearing. Washington Post. Tree cutter, Brandon Fellows, has been sentenced to 3.5 years in prison after interrupting and challenging the sentencing judge in his case. Fellows, who represented himself, was found guilty of obstructing an official proceeding, entering a restricted building, and disorderly conduct charges following his 36-minute incursion into the Capitol on January 6. During the trial, Fellows called U.S. District Judge Trevor N. McFadden a modern-day Nazi running a kangaroo court. The judge described Fellows' conduct as contemptuous and accused him of making lewd comments to his probation officer and outlandish accusations against prosecutors. Breakaway Transnistria asks for Russian aid. Foreign policy. Members of the pro-Russian breakaway region of Transnistria in Moldova have called on Russia to protect them from increasing pressure from Moldova. The region, which broke away from Moldova in the early 1990s, held an extraordinary session of the Congress of Deputies this week, where lawmakers voted in favor of a resolution seeking Russian intervention. Although they stopped short of calling for annexation, the vote has raised concerns in the West. Russia has 1,500 troops stationed in the region along with 22,000 tons of Soviet-era ammunition. Although Russia has not yet responded to the call for help, it is feared that the Kremlin could act as a spoiler in Moldova's upcoming elections. Three very different border realities. CNN. There is a continuing narrative about the U.S. southern border that the Trump administration and Fox News have been promoting, but it is a false one. The border in South Texas is not under siege. It is not being overrun by criminals or even just people who are trying to enter the U.S. illegally. In fact, the opposite is true. The number of people crossing the border illegally has dropped significantly over the past decade. The number of people who are caught crossing the border illegally has dropped by about 75% since 2000. The number of people who are caught crossing the border illegally has dropped by about 75% since 2000. The number of people who are caught crossing the border illegally has dropped by about 75% since 2000. The number of people who are caught crossing the border illegally has dropped by about 75% since 2000. EPA to exempt existing gas plants from tough new rules for now. New York Times. The Biden administration has announced that it will delay a controversial regulation that would require power plants in the United States to capture their carbon dioxide emissions before 2040. Existing gas-fired plants will be exempt from the regulation for now. The delay comes as the administration is also expected to relax elements of another major rule to limit carbon pollution from automobiles in response to pressure from automakers and labor unions. The power plant rule will now only apply to existing coal-burning plants and gas-fired plants that are built in the future. The Environmental Protection Agency plans to write a separate regulation to address climate pollution from gas-fired plants currently in operation. Why Trump's effort to run out the clock in federal election case is working. Washington Post. The Supreme Court has announced that it will consider Donald Trump's argument that he has broad immunity for his actions as president. This argument has been rejected multiple times in various venues previously, and most independent observers view it as invalid. However, the Supreme Court will now have the opportunity to weigh in on the matter. If the court agrees with Trump's argument, it is likely to slow down the legal process, making it unlikely that Trump's actions in response to the 2020 election will be adjudicated by the time voters go to the polls in November. Trump has been indicted for his efforts to retain power after the election, and there are 15 months before the next presidential election in 2024 during which his response to the election could be adjudicated. However, the process has already moved slowly, and the Supreme Court's consideration of Trump's immunity claim will likely further delay the proceedings. If Trump wins the presidency in 2024, he could attempt to pardon himself, thus avoiding accountability for his actions. House passes bill to extend government shutdown deadlines. Washington Post. The House on Thursday approved legislation to extend the expiration date for federal funding later into March, sending the measure to prevent a partial government shutdown that was set for Saturday to the Senate, where it is expected to pass. What makes Super Tuesday so important? It's all about the delegates. Here's a look at the numbers. Associated Press. Super Tuesday, on March 3, will see 16 states and 1 U.S. territory hold presidential nominating contests, with 854 Republican and 1,420 Democratic delegates at stake. The Republican frontrunner, Donald Trump, needs 1,093 more delegates to reach the 1,215 required to be the party's presumptive nominee. His rival, Nikki Haley, has won a fraction of delegates in 4 of the 6 states and territories that have awarded them up to now. On the Democratic side, Joe Biden could pick up a substantial number of delegates, with his total currently at 206. Alabama Senator Katie Britt will deliver GOP response to State of the Union address. CNN. Alabama Senator Katie Britt has been chosen to deliver the Republican response to President Joe Biden's State of the Union address. This decision was made by the House Speaker's office. Arizona Republicans are pushing bills to punish migrants with the border a main election year focus. The Toronto Star. The governor of Arizona is expected to veto a bill that would make it a state crime for migrants to enter Arizona illegally. The bill also faces opposition from the American Civil Liberties Union, ACLU, in Arizona, which has called it inflammatory and accused its supporters of trying to force the governor to act, only for them to criticize her for doing so. The state Senate Republicans have said that the bill would protect people from the crime and security threats caused by the Biden administration's refusal to enforce immigration laws. Trump spouts lies at the border while Biden urges him to help pass immigration bill. The Independent. President Joe Biden and former President Donald Trump both visited the U.S.-Mexico border on Thursday, using the opportunity to address the issue of immigration. Trump visited Eagle Pass, a hotspot for migrants, and accused the Biden administration of failing to protect the border. Biden, meanwhile, addressed wildfires in the state before urging Republicans to pass a bipartisan immigration and border security bill. He also invited Trump to join him in pushing the legislation through. The visits come after a record number of people have crossed the U.S.-Mexico border, with Republican states sending thousands of migrants to Democratic-run cities. The dueling visits highlight the importance of the immigration issue in the upcoming presidential matchup between Biden and Trump. Biden hopes to pass a bipartisan bill to address border security and immigration, while Trump aims to criticize the current administration's handling of the border. The third-party group No Labels will meet privately as it decides whether to launch a 2024 bid. Yahoo! No Labels, the third-party presidential movement, is set to meet on March 8 to discuss its way forward, including the possibility of launching an independent bid for the White House. The group says that no candidates will be chosen at the meeting, but it will provide an opportunity to debate the future of the No Labels 2024 project. The movement has attracted attention from critics of former President Donald Trump, who fear that No Labels could remove votes from President Joe Biden. The group has raised large amounts of money, but has kept much of its work confidential. In reversal, House Homeland Security Chairman now says he'll seek re-election to Congress. Associated Press. Tennessee Congressman Mark Green has reversed his decision to not seek re-election and will pursue a fourth term in office. Green cited calls from constituents and colleagues, including former President Donald Trump, as the reason for his decision. He also expressed a desire to help President Trump end the border crisis. Green had initially announced his retirement earlier this month, but later claimed he wanted to get ahead of a story that had leaked to the media. Migration through the Darien Gap is cut off following the capture of boat captains in Colombia. Associated Press. The capture of 2 boat captains ferrying migrants through Colombia has effectively halted the flow of migrants through the Darien Gap, a treacherous jungle passage between Colombia and Panama. The boat captains worked for 2 tourist transport companies, which acted as a front for migrant trafficking. The companies charged migrants between $140 to $300 for the short boat journey, packing them in with no regard for safety. The halt in transportation has led to a backlog of around 8,000 migrants waiting to cross the Darien Gap, which could overwhelm local infrastructure. Biden and Trump border visits highlight immigration as election issue. Al Jazeera. U.S. President Joe Biden and his predecessor Donald Trump are both visiting the U.S.-Mexico border on Thursday to address the issue of immigration. Biden will visit the border town of Brownsville, Texas, to highlight how Republican lawmakers rejected efforts to toughen immigration policies on Trump's orders. Trump will visit Eagle Pass, Texas, where arrivals have posed a problem for authorities. The visits come as immigration becomes an increasingly important issue for voters, with a Reuters Ipsos poll finding that 17% of respondents listed it as the most important problem facing the U.S. Dozens killed waiting for aid in Gaza, overall death toll passes 30,000. Nikkei Asia. More than 100 Palestinians were killed and over 280 wounded in Gaza City as they waited for an aid delivery, according to Gaza health authorities. Israel challenged the death toll, stating that many of the victims were run over by aid trucks. The incident has led to concerns that it could jeopardize talks in Qatar aimed at securing a ceasefire and the release of Israeli hostages. The U.S. has called for an urgent investigation into the incident and has discussed the matter with leaders of Egypt and Qatar. Carnage at Gaza food aid site amid Israeli gunfire. Here's what we know. CNN. At least 104 Palestinians were killed and 760 injured while trying to access food aid in Gaza City on October 21. The incident occurred as Palestinians gathered around aid trucks sent by Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, amid a background of widespread hunger and poverty in the enclave. The Israeli Defense Force, IDF, used live fire, according to the Palestinian Ministry of Health in Gaza. The IDF initially said that the chaos began when Palestinians tried to loot the trucks. However, eyewitnesses disputed this account, stating that Israeli forces opened fire on people near the trucks, causing drivers to panic and drive away. The incident represents one of the deadliest single events in Gaza since the war between Israel and Hamas began. The tragedy came at a critical time in negotiations between the two sides for a deal to pause fighting and allow humanitarian aid into Gaza. Following the incident, Hamas warned that the killing of people collecting aid could lead to the failure of talks. The U.S. National Security Council stated that it was looking into the events and called for a temporary ceasefire. Risks to our national security: White House to investigate national security data risks from Chinese vehicles. ABC. The U.S. Commerce Department is investigating whether Chinese vehicle imports pose national security risks and could potentially impose restrictions on them due to concerns about connected car technology. The investigation is focused on whether Chinese assembled smart vehicles could collect sensitive data about U.S. citizens and infrastructure and send it to China. President Joe Biden has called this effort an unprecedented action to protect national security and has directed the Commerce Department to respond to the risks. The investigation will also look at autonomous vehicles. The Chinese embassy in Washington has criticized the U.S. proposals, urging the agency to stop hyping up the China threat theory. That's all for today's news update from the 6 Degrees Briefing. I'm Dr. Six, your resident observer from the world of 6 Degrees. Let's dive into the stories we covered today. First, we heard about Hunter Biden's testimony before House Republicans, where he firmly denied allegations that his business dealings had benefited his father, President Joe Biden. He effectively responded to the various allegations and concerns raised by Republicans, discrediting them in the process. Next, we learned that the U.S. says falling trade with China could be a positive development, with the decline in trade seen as an indication of diversification on both sides. However, some experts argue that the decline is a sign that both economies are moving away from each other. We then discussed the sentencing hearing of Brandon Fellows, a defiant January 6 rioter who challenged the judge and was sentenced to prison. Fellows' conduct during the trial was described as contemptuous, and he was accused of making lewd comments and outlandish accusations. Moving on, we heard about the pro-Russian breakaway region of Transnistria in Moldova calling on Russia to protect them from increasing pressure from Moldova. The vote has raised concerns in the West, as Russia's response could act as a spoiler in Moldova's upcoming elections. We also covered the false narrative about the U.S. southern border, which the Trump administration and Fox News have been promoting. The number of people crossing the border illegally has actually dropped significantly over the past decade, debunking claims of a border under siege. In addition, we discussed the Biden administration's decision to exempt existing gas plants from tough new rules on carbon dioxide emissions for now. This delay comes as the administration is expected to relax elements of another major rule to limit carbon pollution from automobiles. We then touched on the Supreme Court considering Donald Trump's argument for broad immunity for his actions as president, which could slow down the legal process and potentially allow him to avoid accountability for his actions. Other stories we covered include the House passing a bill to extend government shutdown deadlines, the importance of Super Tuesday in the presidential nominating contests, and Alabama Senator Katie Britt being chosen to deliver the Republican response to President Biden's State of the Union address. Additionally, we talked about Arizona Republicans pushing bills to punish migrants, Biden and Trump both visiting the U.S.-Mexico border to address immigration, and the third-party group No Labels discussing the possibility of launching an independent bid for the White House. Lastly, we heard that Tennessee Congressman Mark Green has reversed his decision to not seek re-election and will pursue a fourth term in office, and the capture of boat captains in Colombia has cut off migration through the treacherous Darien Gap. It's been a busy day in the world of news, with a wide range of topics covered. As always, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions on these stories. What are your ideas? Let's discuss. Thank you for tuning in. The content above showcases the latest briefing reports and analytical synopses, thoughtfully curated by the 6Do team. These insights stem from a wide array of reputable media outlets, think tanks, government sources, and specialized experts worldwide. We encourage you to explore these sources for a comprehensive perspective. Keep in mind that while the content may not always align with the official standpoint of 6Do Brief, it's not meant to be taken as absolute directives for decision-making. Comprising seasoned media professionals, learned scholars, and accomplished scientists, the 6Do team embodies a trailblazing, fully independent media entity. To customize 6Do Brief to meet your professional needs, you have the option to subscribe to a diverse array of briefings on our website, 6dobrief.com. Regardless of your location, you can conveniently receive 6 debrief via email.